this is a sort of 4-day-long process of going through the different stages of the faculty job search. We are going to cover different aspects of this process, sometimes in detail. Obviously, today is an overview session, so we're going to cover a lot of topics. As you will go through this week, you may have questions that are specific to your particular process or the process you're in, and we encourage you to obviously meet with advisors at Career Services to answer your very specific questions as we go through this. We will try to cover, in as much detail as we can in these types of workshops. What's important to sort of have in mind as you're going through this process. This may be your first time on the faculty job search, maybe coming back again for another round, but we're always happy to meet with PhD students and postdocs individually through our office to sort of give you sort of individual feedback. Before we start, I really want to start off with a big thanks. And so thanks to you for joining us. I know this is coming into a very busy time of the academic year right at the start. So I appreciate you taking the time to join us for this week of workshops and panels. I also want to encourage you on a Monday morning to recognize the great jobs that you've all been doing over the last year and a half. I know this has been a very challenging time, especially for PhDs and postdocs doing research. There's been a lot of interference with that. If you've all had to continue on and work independently to sort of make things happen and get progress done. I know this is our current environment is going to impact the faculty job search in sometimes small ways, sometimes big ways, and that can be challenging. I also feel that there's never enough positive reinforcement in academia. So I really want you to take this moment to, I'll take this moment to ensure you that you're doing a fantastic job in whatever research that you're doing, right? It is hard, but you're here today and you're really being proactive and thinking about your future. So thank you for doing that. I also want to thank my colleague, Helen Foe, who's been organizing this prep camp directly. Helen is in the wings of the Zoom session. Helen, do you want to say hello to everyone?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Helen will be monitoring the chat. So if you do have questions directly, Helen will be the first point of contact, and then we can sort of answer those questions as we go through. The other colleagues that you're seeing on the screen here, Diane, Marianne, Kate, you'll intersect with them in different parts throughout this prep camp. We're all going to be presenting to you in different ways. So please do say hello to everyone. Come and see us at Career Services. We'll be happy to work with you. This is an overview, so we are going to move through at pace, which is why we're recording as well, so that you can have access to that. But these are the general topics that we are going to be covering, sort of the when you should start applying and what that feels like, the where and the how. We're going to cover in brief things like the job application process, because there are specific workshops on this, and interviewing. We have a couple of great panels. But what I want to do and what I make sure that you walk away with today is access to the resources that we have that you can be using 24/7 beyond these sessions to make sure that you're really prepared for this process, applying for faculty jobs, what happens beyond that, what happens when you get one, all these other things there. So I'm going to really focus in on some of the key resources that we have that I think you should be using as we go through this process. Now, obviously, you're here in this prep camp, so that means you are interested in the faculty path. It doesn't mean that it's the only path that you're interested in, obviously, but the path from being a PhD student to a faculty member in the humanities and social sciences, or a PhD student to a postdoc to a faculty position in all disciplines, it's a pretty straight path that's out there. And so you've been investing a lot of time to get to this point. Obviously, when we talk to PhDs and postdocs about their careers, there's oftentimes this sense that there's a faculty path and then there's everything else. And I want to start off today just by quickly reassuring you that that's a very simplistic model, right? This is a much more accurate representation of what the career paths in front of you look like. They're diverse, they merge, they split, they go different ways, they circle back around. And so no matter what happens on this academic job search cycle that you're on, if you're actively applying right now, whether you do get a faculty position, whether you don't find one this time around, there are so many opportunities out there for PhDs with the skills that you bring, with the ways that you can solve problems, with the communities that you can build. And so I just want to ensure that you have this realization that there's lots of opportunities out there, and we're happy to help you with that. Obviously, our goal at Career Services is to support your goals in terms of your career next steps, but there are plenty of different paths that you can take to get to a good place. So let's start off then with a general timeline of sort of what this process is going to look like. And I'm going to walk through some of these different stages in more detail as we go through. The first sort of step is this idea of developing a job search and networking strategy. We'll talk about what that networking looks like in just a second. Now, this can start for many years or a couple of years, let's say, before you're actively on the job market. But if you haven't sort of coalesced your thinking and are on that job market right now, that's fine too. In an ideal world, though, you think about ahead of time how you want to position yourself, the types of roles that you're interested in, who would be good advocates and mentors for you as you're going through this process, what you can learn from people who've already gone through this process. And you can take all that information and apply it as you are going through and going through your own job search cycle for yourself. So this is a great thing. If you are in this prep camp in advance for applying, then lots of things that you can be doing as well. Many of you have probably been working on your application materials already, and certainly up to 6 months before you can really begin to firm these up and finalize them. But I would say that you don't want to go all the way and try to have a final version of all your documents, because there are opportunities to sort of continue to customize and tailor these resources for the roles that you're going to be applying to. And that there may be small changes that you're going to be making, but they can be important changes as well. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go through. But probably right now is when you're going to be doing this, and I encourage you all to come and see us with your draft materials so that we can give you feedback on that. Interviewing in general terms happens, so lots of jobs will come out. The jobs that are available will come out in sort of the August onwards timeframe. Interviewing then sort of overlaps with that, so that you might have interviewing starting in October and then going all the way through into 2022. And obviously the negotiation part of that goes hand in hand once you've been selected as the final candidate. So that's the typical time frame for that. And then there's sort of the decision-making sort of part of the process, right? So whether you get an offer or whether you and accept it, or get an offer and choose not to accept it, or don't get an offer, there are lots of things that you need to be doing at that point in time to position yourself for whatever comes next. And those, maybe applying for different new postdocs or other postdocs, and maybe looking for other career paths that are exciting to you. So this is that process too. And obviously that's a sort of a more intense process, because for some of you, there's a sort of a deadline in terms of graduation or your postdoc ending. But again, lots can be done ahead of time and during that time to sort of set you up for success. The first question we're going to cover today is really this idea of, well, am I ready to apply right now? And I probably, based on the fact that you're all here, probably many of you say to yourself, I am ready and I am applying and I want to make the best of it. For some of you, you still may have doubts about, is this the right time to apply? Should I apply this year and next year? Should I apply this year and try it out, and then next year do it for proper? These are good questions. The paths that exist for these, the career paths that you're interested in are very fixed in an academic setting, right? So in many cases, in STEM fields, you need a PhD and a postdoc, and then you'll go into a faculty role. In humanities and social sciences, you don't always need a postdoc, and there's a growing number, I think, of postdoc opportunities out there. Sometimes it's the PhD to the faculty role directly. So there's lots to think about in terms of when this sort of is going to happen for you. And I've written here on the screen a few of the considerations that I think are worth keeping in mind as you think about your own readiness for these types of roles. And I think fundamentally in the academic setting, your ability to attract funding and your ability to get your research out there in terms of presentations, publications, book manuscripts, whatever that looks like, those are really the currency for most academic institutions. And when I say most, I would say probably the research-focused institutions that are out there. But in general terms, what search committees are looking for is your past experience in attracting funding and publishing as a predictor of your future ability to do the same. So where you are with your publications and funding is a sort of a thing to consider as you're thinking about your own readiness. I would say sort of more importantly is clarity in terms of where you want to take your research next. So if a research institution is where you want to be heading next, are you able to articulate a very clear vision of what that research will look like on day one, throughout the first 2 years, and then for the next 10 years, right? So it's really thinking about formalizing and making concrete and tangible what that research looks like. And then being able to talk about it, right? Really being able to sell people on why that's exciting, why that's cutting edge, why that's going to move your field forward because of the research that you're doing. Right? These are things that you can be practicing all the time to make sure that you are ready, because the whole job search process requires you to continue to do that over and over again to different people. I also think it's important to think about, your preferences in terms of the institutions that you'd like to work at. And I know for some institutions, for some disciplines, there aren't that many positions available each year, right? So you have a limited number of institutions perhaps to choose from. other academic disciplines have more opportunities out there. But I still think it's important to know from your perspective where you'd like to work. What's that institution like? Is it teaching focused? Is it undergraduate focused? Is it a certain type of research intensive institution that you would be able to work, have a preference to work at? Because taking a faculty role in an institution that you don't want to be at or isn't your ideal place to be isn't necessarily what you want to end up doing, right? So you really want to have some choice in the matter and try to position yourself for those roles and those institutions that are going to be the best fit for you. Sometimes you're going to need to be on the academic job market because things happen in the world around you, with your partner or other things, your family, that make you have to sort of make a decision pretty quickly. So that's a reality too. I also want to make sure that everyone realizes that no one ever feels 100% ready for any job that they're applying for or ready to apply for that. So that sort of lingering doubt that you might have about whether you are good enough or your research is good enough, everyone has that, and that's fine. It's just something that we all have as an internal narrative in our heads. I also want to make sure that you are sort of, as much as possible, in control of advocating for your next steps. And when I say that your advisor and PI doesn't always know best, it's not a critique necessarily of your PI or advisor. It's just sometimes we've worked with students and postdocs who told us that their advisor and PI has said to them, "You're not ready to be on the job market, right? This is not, you should wait." And they haven't done that, and they've successfully interviewed for and been offered positions in academic settings, right? So I think in many cases, most cases, some cases your advisor and PI is being supportive and trying to offer great professional development advice. Sometimes you need to make a decision that sort of positions yourself for the career options that you want that are out there. Obviously, keeping your PI and your advisor as an ally and someone who can write a good reference is part of the process that you need to be on, but you have some agency in this as well. In terms of trying to position yourself for, or trying to understand your own readiness, this is where I'm going to introduce one of the resources that I'm going to mention time and time again. Helen has put the link to this platform in the chat for you. This is Aurora. It's a PhD and postdoc focused professional and career development platform filled with workshops and workbooks and interviews with PhDs in a variety of different settings. They have a professional career path and an academic career path. So much here to take advantage of. This is funded in part by Penn University Life in GAPSA, and we appreciate the support for for being able to bring this to campus with their support. One of the workshops that I've listed here is, are you ready to apply for academic jobs? So if you want to learn more about this sort of readiness, then this is a great place to be, to look. So please take advantage of this resource. And then I've just listed here a couple of other sessions that might be helpful to you as you're thinking. So if you have a couple of years before you may be on the job market, then understanding these workshops here on the left that I have listed will set you up for success so that you have good publications and are able to talk about your research in exciting ways and have funding to sort of point to as a sort of a means of your success that's out there. So again, great panels, great discussion, great resources through Aurora. Do take advantage of that. Let's now think about some of the sort of the actual timelines within a job cycle, right? So traditionally, this is how I would describe the ebbs and flows of the academic job market, right? So most of the positions you might be interested in will come out sort of between August and November, let's say. There may be another bump around January and February that might be failed searches that didn't happen or new funding that appeared or whatever that looks like. But that was sort of the traditional path. I would say, especially post-pandemic or mid-pandemic, depending on where we are, it's a little bit more extended, right? There's a little less of a unique bump of positions earlier on. I'm seeing faculty positions being advertised into 2022. So if you are on the academic job market, you really want to make sure that you're paying attention to the job boards and your professional associations, because there are always tenure track roles being advertised very late into the 2022 season. So this is just a reminder to you to keep an eye on that and don't sort of, if you're not seeing positions right now in the next few months, don't give up on that, because there may be other positions that are coming out there as well. In terms of the timing when these jobs do come out, I think sometimes it's about what's happening at the specific institution. Do they have access to funding? And there was a lot of hiring freezes that then thawed slowly, and that sort of comes and goes, right? So sometimes there's a position, but until the funding is approved, they can't advertise it, and that's why it may be delayed. There are failed searches where they don't find an ideal candidate and they still want that position, so they might restart that search moving forward, or they might decide to move that sort of position into a visiting position, whether a 1-year or a 3-year position. And those types of positions, of visiting assistant professor positions, are often later in the cycle advertised so that you can apply for those as well. So these are just other examples of reasons why there's not just a uniform cycle of these job postings out there. So you do have to sort of keep an eye out on what's going on. So sort of, are you ready? And in most cases, you will be ready, and you need to make sure that you've done some work to be able to articulate your readiness. The when to apply, so being ready for the next few months is going to be critical, but you want to make sure you're spreading out your applications to match those positions that are popping up. And then the where to apply is really about sort of the diversity of academic institutions that are out there. And this is a very simplistic breakdown of universities that you might be interested in from your perspective. But it is important to know why they are different and how they're different and how the culture within those organizations is different and which of these is going to be the best fit for you moving forward. Many people find that the research-intensive environment like Penn to be a motivating environment. Some people find it a very draining environment, right? And so there is a diversity of institutions out there that you need to understand. For some of you, there's also different departments, right? Your research could position you for one type of department or a different department in a slightly different academic discipline. And you need to do some research, which you probably have already started, into how these departments are different, how they see themselves, how they talk about the research within their departments, these academic disciplines and departments. And so that's more research that you need to do, because you may be applying for a job in an academic department that is different from where your PhD is right now, or your postdoc is right now. And you need to be able to articulate how your research bridges gaps and adds value to these different fields. And that's a research process in itself. And then it's important to then do some self-reflection and ask yourself, what are the skills that I need that might be different in a research intensive versus a teaching intensive, a small liberal arts versus a giant state school? Are there different skills that might be differently helpful if I'm targeting those types of institutions, right? And so obviously it's hard to know if you've never been at a certain type of institution. So if you've only been to schools like Penn, it's hard to know what faculty life would be like in an institution that isn't like Penn. So then it's going to be important to think about the academic networking that you can be doing. And academic networking is a fantastic way of gathering insights into different types of experiences that PhDs and postdocs have had as they transition from their, where they got their degree or where they finished their postdoc to the faculty roles that they are playing now, and what surprised them about that role, what they wish they had done more of to prepare themselves for that, what they know in their current role now is going to be a good skill to have for new candidates who are interested in that. So answers to the questions about what it's like to be in different types of institutions can come from you if you've had that experience, but this list here also includes the people that you need to be sort of connecting with to get the fullest picture possible of what those types of institutions look like and how you can prepare yourselves for that. So your advisor, your PI can be a great sort of point of contact, but the alumni that come from your different institutions, whether that's Penn or other institutions, who are now in faculty roles, they will give you probably much more recent, much more up-to-date perspectives of what it's like to work in these different institutions. And they will give you information that you can then use to gain those skills if you're still at Penn doing your PhD or postdoc, or to talk about more specifically in your application materials if you already have those skills and are on the job market right now. So finding the right people, well, first of all, figuring out what your questions are, and then finding the right people is going to be very critical. So how do you do that? Well, one of the tools that I can sort of highlight here would be the LinkedIn. And people often say that faculty members don't use LinkedIn as much. It's for other types of jobs. And I would say not true based on this, right? So this is the Penn alumni who are on LinkedIn, and there's about 180,000 of them. And I just did a keyword search for professor, which allows me to hit on assistant professor, associate professor, professor. And there's 17,000, almost 18,000 Penn alumni in professor roles. And there's about 4,000 of them in the greater Philadelphia area, right? And these are going to be people who are obviously more recent hires or more recent faculty, and so have have great perspectives on what the process looks like. So these are some of the people from that list of 17,000 people across our STEM, social science, and humanities background. And you can see on LinkedIn when they graduated, You can see the field that they're in. You can see the role that they have. You can see even how you're connected to them. So these are all second-degree connections with me. I'm not connected to Rebecca on LinkedIn, but I have a shared connection who I might be able to leverage to help me connect to Rebecca if I wanted to reach out and ask Rebecca about her experiences on the faculty job market, right? So each of these people has information that you don't have about being a faculty member at a different type of institution. And so being able to reach out and ask questions is a fantastic way of gathering information. And I guarantee that most Penn alumni in faculty roles would be happy to share their insights because they benefited from similar outreach that they did, and they know how important it is to have up-to-date information about how to position yourself for these types of roles. Now, what you'd be doing when reaching out to people that you find would be what we call informational interviewing, right? It's asking people about their roles so that you can leverage their experiences to make your application more effective and almost more efficient as well, because you're learning from their own experiences. So this guide for informational interviews here is just as applicable for expanded career roles as it is for faculty roles. And I encourage you to take a quick look through it. It's an easy read to sort of help you understand how to make the most of these interactions moving forward. And the types of questions that I might think would be good questions to ask or interesting questions to ask are some of the ones that I've listed here, right? So if you've found someone who works at a small liberal arts institution, who talks about their research, and you can reach out to them and say, oh, how have you positioned, your research from the Penn experience that you had to this smaller institution, more focused on undergraduates? What did that look like for you? What did you have to do? How did you have to communicate to the search committee that you were able to do that? Right, that's just an example of hearing from someone else's experience that's really going to help you understand how you can do something similar, right? So that you don't have to figure it out all by yourself. You're leveraging the insight that other people are going to give you, right? So all of these questions here allow you to take away something and say, well, what can I do based on that answer? What can I change in my research statement or my CV? Or how might I answer an interview question when someone says, well, why do you want to work at this school more effectively? Because you could say, I've been networking with people from Penn who are working as faculty members in different institutions, and they all share the same insight that working at these institutions is great because of X. And I like X, and I have done X, and here's an example of X. And so, your interview questions can even be much more substantial and more tangible if you've had some of these discussions, because then you're basing your answer on the shared input from these contacts that you're making. So I do encourage you to sort of use this as a thing that you can be doing throughout the job application process, right? You might be applying for positions next month, but that doesn't stop you from using these networking outreach opportunities to learn and grow from those interactions. If you have questions about how to start these conversations or what to gain from that, then do let us know. Jumping back to Aurora as that resource that I mentioned earlier, they have a great How to Network Successfully in Academia workshop that you can take a look at. So that's going to go into more details about what that can look like and how to take advantage of that. So just another push for that as a resource. As I was poodling around on LinkedIn looking for how many professors are out there, I also came across this post. This is from Maren Wood, who's actually the founder of Beyond the Professoriate, which oversees the Aurora platform. And here she shares some insight into networking in academia that sort of provides another sort of insight into that process and how to make the most of it. And what you'll find time and time again is that people will say this is so valuable, right? Yes, you can spend lots of time looking at your own research statement in your own teaching philosophy, in your own CV, but what you can learn from interacting with people and having these conversations with people already in faculty roles will make writing those documents so much easier and more productive and more meaningful. So that networking component is a lifelong skill that you can sort of practice moving forward. If you want an easy way to sort of ease yourself into networking, then our panels this afternoon are fantastic opportunities. These are ways that you can have easy conversations. These are all, in many cases, Penn alumni, or they're connected to Penn right now as faculty members. You can ask easy questions in the chat, which isn't stressful at all, and you can get some great feedback from these faculty members who can share their experiences. Let me jump in and answer this question that popped up in the chat then. Can I reach out to people who are on LinkedIn in the department I'm applying to, or is that something that can backfire? So that's a complicated question. It's a good question. to a certain extent, it depends on where you might be in the process, right? And it depends on what types of interactions that you might have had beforehand. So in an ideal setting, let's say you're interested in certain institutions that have great departments that you'd like to be part of, and you've been part of whether in-person or virtual academic conferences, where you've intersected with faculty from that institution and listened to their talks or chatted with them at their posters or engaged with them as part of discussions. That's a very natural way of learning about an institution that you might be able to sort of then build on as you are more specifically applying for a role. Because if someone knows you and you say, hey, I see the position is posted for your department, I'm going to be applying, I'd love to chat and hear your thoughts about the department as a whole, or the research area, or what the priorities are amongst faculty, or whatever that is, then I think that can be a very sort of natural discussion to have. If the people that if you're applying for a department and you don't know the people at this point in time, and I wouldn't necessarily connect with them on LinkedIn as being the primary goal. I think it's always okay to reach out to someone and saying, I'm going to be applying for the faculty role in your department. Would you be comfortable with chatting with me about your experience thus far? And as long as it's not the search chair or the department chair, and as long as you have some overlap with someone, so they may be a Penn alum or that from your department that you might be able to speak with, then I think it's okay, right? So I would encourage you to chat with us at some point, to sort of, as we can break that down and give you some strategies around that. But so long as I think you're open and saying, I'm going to be applying for, and I'd love to chat, if you're comfortable, I'd love to reach out, then I think you're covered in that way. I don't think it can backfire, but your goal probably isn't necessarily to connect on LinkedIn. It's just to find out who those people are on LinkedIn and then find other avenues to reach out and have those conversations. I hope that answers some of that question. Okay, the next thing I want to sort of jump into are the application materials that you're going to be working on. So these are things that you brought with you, that you've looked at your CV 1,000,001 times, and your brain melts every time that you look at it, because it's, to be honest, everyone's CV is not that interesting as a document. The CV is not a dynamic document in many cases, but they are important. Obviously, it's one of the reasons why, it's one of the things that search committees are going to base your candidacy on. So getting the right applications in the right way is going to be a good thing to focus on. In many cases, these are the documents that are sort of the things that people are going to be looking at. Your CV is the document that everyone's going to look at, and then they ask for all these other documents on top. So if it's a research-intensive institution, they might ask for a research statement, a teaching philosophy, a diversity, equity, inclusion statement. Now, some institutions only ask for a CV, and then they say, put a cover letter together. And so sometimes the cover letter has to be a little bit of the research statement and a little bit of the teaching philosophy and a little bit of the diversity statement, because the other documents aren't asked for. Where other documents are asked for, so they ask for a cover letter, a CV, a research statement, teaching philosophy, a DEI statement, then the cover letter doesn't have to work so hard, because these other documents are going to make up or going to cover most of that territory by themselves. You still want to get people excited about reading those other documents within your cover letter, but you perhaps don't have to go into so much detail. If a job description asks for a cover letter and a CV, and that's the only things that they ask for, don't send them the other things, right? Only send them the things that they ask for, because they probably won't read things that they haven't asked for, because then that becomes an issue with being equitable across different candidates. So, making sure that you are paying attention to the what is requested. And so if they ask for a one-page research statement or a two-page teaching philosophy, that's great, right? It gives you insight into exactly how long it needs to be, but it does need to be that long, right? Don't sort of decide that you're going to squeeze everything into 3 pages when they only ask for 1 page. I'm going to ask a question that I'm immediately going to answer, so don't worry about answering this, but because I think you already know what I'm going to say here. So which of these documents should be customized for every job that you apply to? Now, you might get different advice about this, that obviously your research that you are sort of marketing is going to stay the same no matter the institution that you apply to. It's important research to you, so you shouldn't need to change it. My perspective is that there are small things that you can highlight within each of your applications that can be customized to the different schools that you're applying to. And one of the reasons that I think it's so important to do that is if we think about how long these documents are, right? We sort of add them up together. On average, you're going to have about 14 pages of of material that you're sending, but that could be much, much more depending on, how long these different documents are. And reading 14 pages of materials that are in no way intersecting with the institution that search committee inhabits, I think is less appealing than really sort of focusing on saying, well, how can I make sure that, I'm positioning myself for success at this particular institution? How can I demonstrate to them that I value the resources that they have, that I understand the students that they have, that my research will be valuable to the department as a whole, right? So these small tweaks that you can make in each of these documents can be fantastic at sort of helping the search committee engage with you in a more meaningful way. Sure, it's easier to have one set of documents and send it out to 30 different institutions, 30 plus, but I think it's worth the extra effort to sort of customize where you can things that make you well positioned for those roles. Not surprisingly, the Aurora platform has a whole set of resources on this, right? So these are the workshops that they have on putting together your application materials. You can see here everything from general applications to the teaching statement, to the teaching portfolio, to the research statement, to the diversity statement. All of these are specific. We have some for humanities and social sciences, some for STEM, so you'll be able to get those discipline-specific input there for your materials. So if you want more information, in addition to our sessions that we have this week, then the Aurora platform is going to be a great place to take a look at. Let's think about the CV then. As I said, the CV is a fairly fixed document. It's meant to demonstrate what you've done so far in your academic career. I think search committees are oftentimes somewhat biased by things like institution and advisor and things like that. So sometimes that's what the CV does. It tells you what your sort of academic pedigree is, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. That's the way it tends to work. It's a great place to list your publications or your upcoming publications or your working papers, right? So that's the sort of, again, the currency that people are looking for. Your grants are going to be out there. That's one of the currencies of the application process that search committees are very focused on. So these are just examples of what you're going to be covering. The ones in red here, I think, are slightly different sections in a CV because unlike everything else, which basically says, this is what I've done, your research and your teaching interests are things that can also be things that you will be doing, right? That you will have interest in, right? So if you are applying for a faculty role in a department that is somewhat different from where you are right now, and your research doesn't necessarily match exactly in terms of what they say that they're looking for, because you've been doing your own research in your own department, the research interest can be a way of saying, my research background has addressed these questions. In the future, my research will address these areas, right? And you can begin to use words that help connect your current research with the research that they've said is important, right? So it allows you to sort of customize where you're going with your research in small ways to make sure that the search committee sees value in the research that you'd be bringing, because you get to use slightly different words to describe it. So that's just one example. For teaching interests, obviously what you can do in a teaching interest section is tell people what you have taught in terms of the topic areas, what you know that they want you to teach, right? Because in most job applications, they'll say, we need you to teach X, Y, and Z. So probably in your teaching interests, you should say X, Y, and Z because you're interested in teaching them, obviously. But then you could also say, and I would also like to teach these courses. And then you could perhaps even mention why that would be impactful, because they'd be a great fit for the curriculum in terms of intersecting with this course or whatever that is. So you can sell people on courses that you've yet to teach, but on the idea of those courses in the CV. So both the research interests and the teaching interests are very sort of future-focused sections, different from the other sections that are out there. So is this the order? No. I think the order is one of the things that's very easy to customize, right? So if you're applying for a teaching intensive institution, your teaching experience might rise closer to the top. If you're applying for a research intensive one, then your publications, your funding, and your research experience might rise to the top. So by no means is there a singular order in which you need to cover these sections, and very much is dependent on the institution, dependent on your academic field as a whole, depending on what you want to prioritize as well, right? So sometimes someone may have professional experience, previous roles that they've had that are actually important or intersect well with a faculty role, and those might be drawn to the forefront in a slightly different way. So there's a lot of areas to sort of play around with the order out here, and don't feel like there's a template for your field. I mean, academic disciplines like to be fairly conservative in terms of what CVs look like. So if you look at your advisors or people in your field, they all look somewhat similar. And so following departmental norms is not a bad idea, but also making sure that this document represents you and what you want to bring to the forefront is important as well. So we're happy to work with you as part of this process to figure out what that looks like. Research statements for those institutions that are focused on research and want research to be a priority for people coming in. Sometimes these documents are called different things: statements, proposals, plans. You should pay attention to the language. Hopefully the search committee chose the right words to reflect what they want, although I'm not always convinced that that's the case. I think people ask for things and don't know necessarily why they're asking for that or what that looks like. In many cases, they'll give you criteria about what they're looking for in these documents. Sometimes they'll just leave it open. The way that I would generally frame the research statement is that it should cover, to a certain extent, the research that you've done, obviously what brings you to where you are right now. But if you're a postdoc, your PhD research may be less relevant, obviously, because you may be in a slightly different field or doing something slightly different now. So it's a little bit about what brought you to where you are today. The research that you're doing now is obviously what search committees will be looking at to say, well, do you have the strong research background, the publication record that we're looking for? But I would say one of the greatest priorities of the research statement is what you're going to be doing, what you're going to be bringing. So almost about 50% of what you're trying to sell in your research statement is the future research. Because the search committee is not going to hire you necessarily because of what you've done. They're going to hire you because of the potential of what you will be doing at that institution. So making sure that you give enough time to really articulating the vision for your future research, the short-term goals, the first year things that you're doing, and the longer-term goals that are going to see you through the 10-year process. This is going to be sort of critically important as you're trying to position yourself for different types of roles that are out there. So this is sort of a breakdown of how I would prioritize the space that you give to these different types of sections. And then in terms of the research that you'll be doing, thinking about ways to make sure that that engages with the school, the types of institutions that you're applying to, right? In the job description, did they talk about collaborative and interdisciplinary research? Can you frame some of your future research in that language? Is it a school that focuses on really giving undergraduate students opportunities to engage in research, in which case making sure even in your research statement that you talk about how your future research will engage future students can be a great way of demonstrating that you're aware of the importance of that moving forward. These other things, the departmental reputation, whether media will pick it up. I mean, these are hard things to talk about, but sometimes that's what deans or search committees or whatever it is, they may be thinking about in the back of their minds. The institutional resources, though, I think are critical. And probably you can mention this in the cover letter, that would be sufficient. But even in the research statement, if you can make sure that you are positioning, how the institution will be a great fit for the research that you're going to be bringing to that institution, to that department, that's a fantastic thing to do. The flip side to that is don't say something in a research statement that is totally impossible to be done at an institution that you're applying to. So my classic example that I always go to is a panel of faculty that we brought in where they had to take someone out of their shortlist because the research statement basically said that the person wanted to establish a primate colony to do primate research at an institution that had no background in doing primate research. And for some institutions, they may have that opportunity, but this was an institution that they said that's never going to happen, right? So that was a missed opportunity to think about what research could actually look like at that particular institution, given that establishing a new primate colony was not on the cards. Fundamentally, in your research statement, the two questions that I encourage people to think about is, why is your research publishable and why is it fundable? Right? And I sort of echoing this idea that money or funding and publications are really the criteria that many people are judged on in terms of whether they make it to the interview phase and whether they make it to the final stage. So really being able to articulate in your own words why that is the case is important throughout your application materials. And that's not these aren't easy questions to answer just off the top of your head. They do need some thinking about, but I think it's fundamentally important to have confident answers to these questions. The teaching philosophy, again, the number of terms that are used to describe this type of document increases every year, I feel like. But these are the common ones that you might often see. Philosophy, a statement, a portfolio, evidence of effective teaching, lots of ways to position your teaching out there. And what I'm going to suggest, obviously, as a great approach to take is to make sure that you are connecting with our colleagues from the Center of Teaching and Learning who will be joining us in this prep camp week to talk about teaching statements and diversity statements. So make sure you attend those sessions coming up this week. But again, they can provide great insight into this process. As can we at Career Services, we're always happy to look at teaching philosophies and give you feedback on that. My suggestions for teaching philosophies is obviously to make sure that they have examples to bring your teaching to life. So not just saying this is my philosophy or this is what I've done, but also saying this is how I did it and this is how the students responded to that. To me, that makes a very engaging document, which is what teaching is meant to be at its heart, an engaging experience. Diversity statements are pretty much common throughout. Sometimes what the job ad will say is to include information about this in your cover letter. Sometimes they'll call for a specific document. There's lots to think about here. And my general recommendation for people putting these together is twofold, two recommendations. One is a one-page diversity statement is a great length, I feel like, to integrate a little bit of your experiences and then think about what that looks like at the institution that you're applying to. I think in one page you can cover a lot of that. These are sort of some of the questions that here that you might cover in that. The other thing I recommend doing is looking at the diversity pages of institutions that you're applying to. Pretty much every institution has one now. Look at the initiatives that they have, that they talk about, that they highlight, and then you can always link your perspective on diversity to some of their initiatives, right? You can say, I'm excited that your institution has this opportunity because I've done this, or I want to be involved in this more because this is so important to me, for these reasons. So if you can link your own perspectives on diversity, equity, inclusion to what the institution is already saying that it prioritizes, then to me, that's a great thing to do. Are these different documents? I'm guessing this is sort of referring to the teaching statements. Yes, they are different documents in terms of they do slightly different things, but at the core of it, they do address many of the same topic areas, right? So, but a teaching portfolio, for example, has a teaching philosophy included in it and sample syllabi and scores that you might have from student evaluations. Whereas a teaching philosophy may not have those discrete sections, but it might pull from those elements as you're putting together your own philosophy and what teaching looks like. In a cover letter, the questions that you're trying to answer here is why should the research committee hire you in particular, and why you want to work there in particular. They know why you want to be a faculty member, you don't really have to articulate that. So the question that you're sort of addressing is why this institution to a certain extent. As people are looking at your application, they're going to come in with preconceived notions about the type of candidate that you might be, right? So maybe they are a small liberal arts school in some non-coastal state, and they may be interested in knowing why you want to teach or why you want to do research at that institution. It doesn't have to be the main part of your letter. I would always recommend the last paragraph is where you're addressing, why this institution. But sometimes it's helpful to address that confidently and positively and demonstrate that you are being proactive about your applications, right? You're being thoughtful about why you're applying, what you can bring, and how your experiences and knowledge and skills will add value. And this is where understanding these different institutions will come into play, because what you learn from conversations from people who work at these institutions will allow you to position yourself and your narrative as you're applying for these types of roles. Everything that I've covered thus far is on our website. We have more information on our website if you want to go through that and take a look at these different sections. This is great information that you can look at in your own time. As I said, we have more specific sessions this week on some of these topics, and the Aurora platform has those additional information as well. Moving along the process, we're going to jump into interviewing right now. So in many cases, the common elements of a faculty interview are sort of twofold. There's a sort of a screening round that might be conference interview style things, or it might just be a video chat with partial members of the search committee. And then there's the on-campus aspect of it, or the virtual on-campus right now, but probably moving to on-campus and then moving back, who knows? But it's sort of the more intense experience that's out there. I don't know what some of the academic conferences will look like this year. I know the MLA is planning on being in person in, I think, Washington this year, for example. I don't know how the interviews will play into that process. But generally, this is what you're going to see as an overview. That on-campus experience is going to be more detailed in terms of the things that you'll have to do, the people that you have to speak with, and what they ask you to do will be dependent on the institution, obviously, and what they're looking for. But these are all the things that you should be aware of that might be coming up on the horizon. in terms of especially screening round interviews, but in general, any aspect of the interview process, these are some of the research, some of the interview questions that you want to be thinking about having good answers for. It's almost impossible to prepare any interview by having prepared answers for questions, but you know that they're going to ask you about your teaching and your research, where you're going to be applying for funding, how you're going to engage with students, what collaboration is going to look like. So, there shouldn't be too many surprises in terms of the types of questions that you're going to get. Being aware of these questions is great. You can begin to formulate in your own head some of the responses. We do mock interviews at Career Services. So if you do have an interview scheduled coming up, we're happy to do a mock interview with you. One of the questions that we get, or that we hear from people who've been on campus interviews that stump them all the time, are usually during the sort of these blocks of 30 minutes. So if you look at a faculty interview schedule, you might see that you have an interview with 5 faculty members, each lasting 30 minutes. And people are ready for those sessions to be sort of intense question and answer sessions. But many times we hear from people who've been on those interviews that the question that they got right at the beginning from the faculty member was, so do you have any questions for me? Which really puts the onus on you to sort of lead the interview, which is much harder than actually you just answering questions that you're asked. But it's really important to be prepared for that, because if you don't have good questions to ask, you can't get them to give you good answers that you can then respond to, right? Because if you just ask them questions and they tell you stuff for 30 minutes, you're probably not leaving much of an impression in their mind at the end of that process, right? They enjoy hearing themselves talk, they get to feel important, they get to share information, but they don't learn a lot about you. But if you can ask them questions that prompt a response that then allow you to say, oh, that's so interesting because in my research this, or, oh, that's so interesting because when I've taught this, I've used this approach. That allows you both to ask good questions, but to leave something behind in the mind of the interviewer. So again, be prepared for this type of question. Aurora has plenty of these workshops again on the different parts of the process of interviewing, the screening, all the way down to the research, the job talk, and even as you see at the bottom here, the negotiation part of the process. So do make sure that you take a look at these as we move forward. I found out there was one green tick mark that I completed lesson 4, and I was like, oh, I wonder what that one is, and it happened to be me, which obviously means that I'm entirely vain because I only looked at my own and completed looking at my own presentation, but that's my issue, I suppose. Another resource that you might want to take a look at is our big interview platform. As the name suggests, this is all about preparing you for interviewing. This is not specific to the faculty role. This is for interviewing in any scenario, but there's lots of information here on how to put together good answers to questions, especially answers that allow you to tell stories about your experience, STAR stories, situation, task, action, result, that allow you to make your research and your teaching come to life. So again, there's a video curriculum that you can use here. You can also do practice mock interviews, right? So I set up a common questions that you get for in faculty roles, mock interview here. There's a pre-recorded person. You get to record your response to this, and then you can play it back to yourself and listen to it. So if you set up your big interview profile, a free profile, we pay for it so that you have access to it free, go up to assignments at the top, throw in the assignments code that Helen's put into the chat here, and then you can just do this practice mock interview for faculty roles, just to give yourself a sense of what that's going to look like. Okay, powering through negotiation, right? So once you do receive an offer, you may have multiple offers, you may just have the one. There's lots of things that to think about in terms of negotiating, in terms of startup money, if you're in a sort of a STEM field, more of a STEM field, or other types of resources that you might be able to negotiate for, not teaching in the first semester, not teaching the first year, released from those teaching responsibilities. These are things that are going to be important to be thinking about. Salary is always a big question when it comes to negotiation. So taking advantage of the Chronicle data on salary that they've collected over many years. I think they have the 2018 to 19 salary data in this now. So you can look at salary by position type, associate, assistant, full professor, adjunct. You can look at it by institution. You can look at it by male, female to see what that looks like. These are all things, obviously, it should look like the same thing, but it doesn't. So these are things that you can take a look at as you're thinking about that salary process. Not necessarily something you need to look at too far ahead of time, but it's going to be there when you need it. On Aurora, there was a couple of sessions on negotiating for faculty offers, one for STEM, one for humanities and social sciences. So take a look at these to think about what that looks like. My input to the negotiation is to make sure that you reach out to people who are early stage faculty members right now and ask them, what were you able to negotiate for as you were applying for your position, right? Because what they were able to negotiate for and how they did it would be great insight for you to have as you're thinking about your own networking strategy moving forward. And not networking, negotiating strategy moving forward. Okay, we're approaching to the end. I just want to share a couple more resources that you should know about so that you can use as you're going through this process. The first is the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. This is a resource that Penn as an institution, so not career services, but Penn as an institution subscribes to. And I think it's like $20,000 a year or something. So you have access then to a membership through this because Penn subscribes as an institution. So if you go to the site, you can log in through your University of Pennsylvania process, set up your free account. And then they have resources that you might be able to find, that you might find helpful, that you might be able to use, both for being a student or postdoc, right? So what you can be doing to make that successful, whether that's writing your dissertation or publishing, but also things to position yourself for the next step beyond that. So you can see here there's a graduate student and postdoc section. And here's one of the topics that you might be able to explore as an example of what they have out there. So again, it's a resource that's just waiting for you to use, and taking advantage of that will be a great thing to do to make sure that you have full access to resources that are going to be helpful to you. Again, I was pooling around on LinkedIn and I came across Chris Smith, who's a colleague from a different institution who's in our professional association of career advisors for PhD students and postdocs. He had a great overview of the faculty job search and other resources that I haven't mentioned that you want to take a look at. So this link here that Helen's throwing in the chat, again, another great resource just to look through to give yourself interesting perspectives on what you can be doing and how to sort of position yourself for these roles.